Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al-Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al-Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa addressed the FII Conference in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, telling attendees there is a, quote, historic opportunity to invest in post-war Syria. Sharaa also held a number of meetings with Saudi officials in Riyadh, as well as representatives of several major Western companies, in an effort to secure investment. A number of Gulf and international companies have expressed interest in doing business with Syria post the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad last December, and the US, European Union, and United Kingdom have all removed a number of sanctions on the country. But the US's Caesar sanctions, which targeted Assad's regime, notably remain on the books, despite a waiver earlier this year and the Senate voting to repeal them earlier this month. Security, meanwhile, continues to be a challenge for Syria. Just this week, a bus was attacked near the southern city of Sweda, following clashes in the area between Druze groups and government forces. Amidst all this, will Sharaa be able to convince investors in Riyadh and elsewhere to put their money into Syria? My guest this episode is Al-Monitor's chief business correspondent, Jack Dutton. Jack takes us through the level of progress Syria has made in its economic modernization quest, whether international firms are cautious about investment in the country, and why Saudi Arabia is particularly interested in cozying up to Damascus. Hope you enjoy. Jack, welcome back to the Al-Monitor Brief.
Great to be back on the podcast, Adam.
Jack, obviously, Syrian President Sharaa had a number of meetings on the sidelines of this conference in Saudi Arabia. What are your main takeaways from his participation in Riyadh?
I think the main message Sharaa has been trying to relay since he's seized power at the end of December after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, that we are here to reform the economy, we're going to liberalize the economy, and we're open for business. And it's quite strategic that it's the platform, the FII platform in Saudi Arabia, which is a huge financial conference. It attracts some of the biggest names in finance and business, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia, Rwandan President Paul Kagame, and from the finance world, you've got the likes of BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and the Public Investment Fund Governor Yasser Al-Rumayyan, and JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, and many others. And overall, it's about 8,500 delegates, including 20 world leaders. So it's a great platform for Sharaa. And Saudi Arabia has kind of emerged since his new government have came in as one of their kind of biggest economic and political supporters in the region and globally. So it was very much, we're open for business. And in his speech, al-Sharaa's speech, he very much spelled out the different industries where there's potential in Syria. For example, he earmarked agriculture and said it plays a very important role in Syria as there's a big surplus. There's 25 million people in the country, and there's enough stock to feed 250 to 300 million people with the production. So that kind of hints at there's a lot of room for exports as well as providing domestic needs of Syria. And those exports can be useful for whether it's foreign companies looking to export certain products or commodities to their country. And there's also other sectors that Sharaa highlighted, such as energy, logistics, real estate, highlighting, for instance, of energy, that at one point there was an output of 1 million barrels per day, and that more than makes up the domestic demand in Syria. So there's a lot of kind of posturing around, look at the resources we have, look at the potential here. And the president really stressed that Syria's strategy when it comes to its reconstruction, which was last week estimated to be, at a conservative estimate by the World Bank, to be $216 billion, they really want to court private sector and foreign investment instead of ask for more aid, because they want to be able to make it easier for entities with influence and relations with Syria. So it's very much a platform for Sharaa to really trumpet the government's achievements and also tout the sectors which might be most appealing to international investors.
Like you mentioned, a lot of big names are there, and a few others I'll throw out. He had meetings with representatives from Hilton Hotels and France's Total Energies. But we've seen a lot of companies and entities express interest in Syria. However, the Caesar sanctions, in particular from the US, continue to be an obstacle. So, my question to you is, how much will these meetings he's had in Riyadh translate into actual investment, tangible money flowing into Syria?
So the Caesar sanctions have really hobbled the the Syrian economy, and there's very strict penalties for companies which are seen to assist Syria's military or certain industries, and that obviously generates many financial risk for these companies, and they could face hefty fines, and individuals can even face huge prison sentences in the US as a result. So although the Caesar sanctions, they apply to some industries, they don't apply to all industries. So, for instance, you mentioned Total Energies. The Caesar sanctions don't apply to petroleum and gas companies and refineries, nor do they apply to Syrian ports. And we saw a huge investment in Syria's second largest port of Tartus in July, with UAE-based DP World investing $800 million to kind of develop the port over 30 years. So there's been some investment, but obviously companies, especially those in the US and Western companies, they've been quite cautious before announcing investments in Syria. A lot of the investments we will hear in Syria, we'll probably hear tomorrow, which is the final day of FII, which is the kind of investment day. So you're going to hear more deals being announced, but those deals often are announced as MOUs, memoranda of understanding, and those are not legally binding deals. Those are more intentional deals with the idea of them becoming legally binding, but it's a long process. And as we're seeing with the Caesar sanctions, we're seeing some progress in the US, but the repeal is not yet finalized. But you've seen the Senate vote overwhelmingly in early October to repeal the sanctions. So I think it will be a matter of time. So I expect there to be some pledges in Syria, but as I say, there'll be in the industries which are not impacted by the sanctions, and there'll be a lot of cautiousness in the form of MOUs and what commitments are made.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Jack Dutton after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25, for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Jack, relatedly, what's your assessment of Sharaa's economic modernization efforts? Is Syria making any progress on that front?
Obviously, we talk about the challenge of some of the sanctions are in place, but let's not forget that al-Sharaa administration has been pushing for the lifting of sanctions, and it's been quite successful so far in that regard. You've seen sanctions lifted from the likes of the US, the EU, the UK, and pledges made from many of these countries, including regional countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and the European Union, Germany, and the UK to help fund Syria's reconstruction. We've also seen a lot of foreign investment. In the speech today, Sharaa said that Syria had seen $28 billion of investments so far this year, which is not a small number. I mentioned earlier the kind of modernization of ports and logistics, with the port of Tartus being the example. It took its first shipment from China on Sunday, And there's also part of that 30-year concession agreement with DP World is an expanded development of free zones in Syria. And it's very much more wider ranging. And with state-of-the-art equipment, we're going to see more trade coming into that port and other ports in Syria. And we've seen as well shipments come in from the likes of the EU and Brazil too. On the kind of more financial side, veering away a bit more from trade, you saw the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance, earlier this year say it's going to start operations with Syria, which shows that modernization is really kicking in, and everyday Syrians are able to invest in cryptocurrencies through official means rather than back channels. But as I said earlier on, despite progress, there's many challenges which remain, from Assad's legacy and corrupt officials, and certain industries like the Captagon drug trade, which need to be clamped down on, and trying to balance the kind of interests of the business and political elite with a broad-based economic inclusion program which works for all of the different groups in Syria, as there's many different factions in Syria, and we've seen flare-ups in conflict as well. So there's definitely a steep hill ahead for Sharaa administration, but there's been a lot of progress so far in terms of economic modernization.
Finally, I want to ask you about Saudi Arabia's role in all this. What do you think the kingdom gets out of building all these economic ties with Syria? Is this more of a business move or is it a political calculation?
I would say it's a bit of both. Obviously, on the business side, investing in a country like Syria, a very well educated country, but has gone through such damage, and the economic has been so stagnant because of decades of Western sanctions and loads of infrastructure being destroyed. There's a lot of potential projects to work on, and Saudi Arabia has capital to deploy, and the returns are very high as well. And part of that investment could align with Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which is the Crown Prince's 2016 agenda. He introduced that year to diversify the economy away from oil by the end of the decade by investing heavily in other sectors such as clean energy, AI, entertainment, etc. And Sharah's speech today, he kind of made a big thing of how grateful he was to Saudi Arabia, how he was actually born in Riyadh, where FII is being held, and mentioned how Vision 2030 doesn't just apply to Saudi Arabia, but should be seen as an economic model of stability for the whole region. So there's this whole kind of idea from the Saudi side of political and regional stability and influence, I guess, over Syrian politics and the economy. And Riyadh has been positioning itself under the Crown Prince to be a unifier in the region. And we've seen the likes of the detente with Iran and Saudi Arabia hosting the Ukraine ceasefire talks. So there's definitely a move from the government there to increase its influence in and outside of the region, and getting kind of, it was basically the third time since Sarah became leader. It's the third time he visits Saudi Arabia. So they're clearly trying to foster that relationship, and there's going to be a lot more investments and announcements to come, I'm sure.
Jack, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting on the conference and all these economic and business matters.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.